All right, guys, this is an incredible interview with Dr. Vickery. We are talking about all things peptides. Let's get into it.
So, hello, Dr. Vickery. How are you?
Hi, I'm well, Kelly. How are you doing? It's been a little while since we've caught up.
Yeah, I'm doing really good. I'm doing really good. Everyone knows I'm interviewing you today, so they're all looking forward to this discussion. So, I
Oh,
will say, oh, go ahead, go ahead.
no, that was all I was saying. Great. I'm
Oh,
glad to have
yeah,
your audience and I back engaged again.
yeah, and I still will have to maybe for the next one. I know we do it every few months. We can do another live Q&A. That was a lot of fun. If
Hmm.
people come with
Yeah.
me, if you're into that, but
Yes.
no pressure. Um, but yeah, I've been taking your supplement stack for quite some time now, and love the creatine, love Thorne. What a great company. Love the nitric oxide. I obviously take your, vitamins and
Yes.
amino acids, and then a few other things. But I, it's hard to know what is helping because I'm also on HR2, but I just feel better overall in general.
You look good.
Um,
You do.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
You have a healthy look about you.
Thank you. Thank you. I
Mhm.
did find, and I'm curious, we can go into the peptide discussion, but I wanted to ask this one question because it's something I noticed recently. So I'm ADHD.
Mhm.
I'm not severe. I've never taken Adderall. I didn't know I was ADHD though. So there was no reason to
Right.
be medicated because I didn't know. And I've kind of learned to work with it. I started Tirzepatide. I felt at the beginning that it kind of helped.
Mhm.
Um, but then as I went up in dose, it's like it got worse. Like my focus was just horrible. And looking into it, I realized a lot of that has to do with your dopamine because the
Mhm.
tirzepatide. Um, and so I started experimenting with like splitting my dose to not have such a heavy 3 or 4 days of fatigue and mental fatigue more than physical. And that seems to be helping. And of course, lowering the dose a little bit helped as well. But I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
On the terzepatide and the effect on focus.
Yeah, on AD, especially if you are ADHD. Yeah.
I mean, I would have to go do a deeper dive
Right.
into the research. So what I'm going to offer you is just, kind of my opinion based on what I do know. I don't know of any mechanisms by which, I mean, the decoupling of dopamine primarily has to do with reward system driven behavior. Typically, overall mood is improved with GLP-1s through a variety of mechanisms, including augmenting neurotransmitter balance, reducing neuroinflammation, which also affects neurotransmitter synthesis, and reducing oxidative stress, potential mitochondrial function improvements, potential. So, the overall typical impact at, again, the lower doses where you're not, like massively sending a GLP-1 signal, is mood improvement. And
Mm-hmm.
typically, people will have more mental energy and a better mood. What you would guess, but it could be wrong, was that your focus would actually improve, right?
It
But
did at
that,
first. Yeah.
yeah, but and so I don't know of any direct reason that in the areas that modulate focus and attention, especially in the prefrontal cortex, the GLP-1s would have a detrimental effect on that.
Yeah.
But there could be. I don't recall in any of my recent reviews of the research identifying ADHD being reported as a common side effect. I don't think it is. But every human system is unique.
Yeah.
Um, and there are a lot of downstream compensations that take place when we uh, exert a particular pressure on the body systems, and the brain specifically, which obviously GLP-1 receptors are prolific in the brain.
Yeah.
That the brain is designed in such a way as to counter regulate quickly to any type of stimulus, and that is a survival mechanism. And so that's why if you're somebody who actually gets a nice euphoric buzz from a couple of drinks, but after you have a couple of drinks every night, you stop having that euphoric buzz and you actually start feeling at baseline worse because your
Mm-hmm.
brain is down regulating that response, trying to keep you from not being all blissed out all the time, where you would be, potentially vulnerable, right, to threats and things of that sort. So in the brain specifically, anything we do that exerts like a cellular response and do consistently, there is eventually compensating mechanisms to try and counter-regulate against that. Now, and that's just a general principle. What would that look like from a GLP-1 perspective? It's hard to say. Of course, a lot of people who've needed to lose a lot of weight have used high doses of these GLP-1s over extended periods of time. And you know that you're going to have some attenuation of receptor response when that happens, right? You're going to, short term, you may decouple receptors where they're just not sending the signal through any longer. Long term, you actually downregulate the number of receptors available. And so there's always going to be that type of impact. And perhaps after an extended period of a GLP-1, there could be some of that taking place that might have an impact. Again, I'm kind of rambling, I know.
Yeah. Well, and I think I might have even expressed it incorrectly. It's not, with ADHD, I don't know how much you know about it, but you like things that really fire you up and interest you, you can go all day. And it's almost like there's not that much that fires me up right now. So therefore I have trouble focusing because I really don't want to do the thing that I need to do because it's not like, Whereas before Tirzepatide, there were things that I could focus on that I didn't really want to do, but I could, so it's almost, that's why I'm kind of thinking dopamine, because it's like, I just have no desire, to do these things. It's not I don't know, but it's more than that's why I don't focus on them, because I don't really.
What about your overall emotional well-being? How is that?
I feel good. I mean, I'm not depressed. I'm not, I try to understand the difference between being depressed and just not being motivated or feeling that motivation,
Yeah.
So,
well, there, of course, it gets very existential.
I know.
But I mean, it is possible that there was something to do with dopamine regulation with the brain, that over time with the impact of the GLP-1 that could have played a role in focus, because dopamine is one of those hormones that plays a role. But it's also possible that this is just different altogether, and it has nothing to do with the GLP-1 whatsoever.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's, there's so much going on at this age too, and menopause and all the things.
And you went through surgery and you went through anesthesia and you have to have your brain recover from that. And even though you did well and you're great and you wouldn't complain, 2 surgeries is traumatic to the body.
It's a lot. Yeah.
I mean, you get cut open. I mean, there's a lot of, it's really a traumatic. And from the standpoint of your nervous system, that you can talk to it a little bit, but there are aspects of your nervous system that you don't have conscious control over. All it knows is like serious threat. We just got seriously traumatized, even though it was for beneficial purposes. So I wouldn't underestimate the impact of 2 surgeries also over a period of time on just kind of your general zeal to push into things.
Well, I've been using my vagus nerve stimulator, so that's
yes, those work. I'm telling you, I'm beginning to get data reports back from patients, heart rate variability, resting heart rate, sleep data, and most people are seeing improvements in these metrics.
And I don't know if it's just me, but I crank it all the way up, like to really, because they say you should like feel it, and it almost takes a full.
Yeah, it depends on the individual, and of course how precisely located you are, right up in that little soft cleft.
Yeah, I try to get. I've been experiencing. I try to find that sweet spot. So.
And so whatever level of stimulus, it's just that you don't need to do it more than 2 minutes twice a day.
Yeah.
Some people think, more will be even better, but you could actually overstimulate the vagus nerve.
Yeah. I'm going to pause for 1 sec. My dog's at the door. Hang on.
Okay. No problem.
All right. So I thought we could talk about peptides today. I'll share, most people already know because I talk about it all the time, but obviously my first introduction to peptides was Tirzepatide, but I didn't really know about the world of peptides. And then you and I chatted and talked about my upcoming knee surgery, and we talked about BPC-157 and TB500, which in my opinion changed the game. I mean, I was out of physical therapy both times in 4 weeks. They were fully impressed. I even told my doctor, he's like, "What are you doing?" And so I let him know. And, even though he's an MD, he was definitely open to it, listened to it, thought it was interesting. So, I guess to start the conversation, a lot of peptides are out there that actually people want to try, but you can't get them through a compound pharmacy. So I'd love to kind of just hear your general thoughts on research grade and going that route, if that's your only option, and what your thoughts are there.
Yeah. And so this really goes back 10 years into my practice history, where I began to get introduced to peptides as therapeutics to augment my overall plans, trying to help patients, whether reverse disease, optimize, whatever. And early on, there were three main classes of peptides that we would use. The body repair, like inflammatory, anti-inflammatory pathways, both for gut and body, BPC-157. And some, back then we had thymosin beta-4. Now we got to get the TB500 version. Yeah. And then there were the growth hormone secretagogues. So these are, there are a number of them, and they end up increasing pituitary signal for IGF-1 production, or growth hormone, which gets converted into IGF-1 in the liver, which is a repair recovery hormone, and also can be an additional catalyst for body composition shifts if you combine it with a fitness and diet plan, and something you can measure, because you can start with a baseline IGF-1 level, introduce these peptides, and then remeasure and see, is the person responding. And then there were the immune peptides, thymosin alpha, and then actually thymosin beta kind of crosses over into that category as well. And, when I was able to begin to do the research on these and look at their impacts in studies, not a lot of human studies, but in studies, and that they were natural, that our genetics encode these peptides, I was like, yeah, I would like to start running trials with patients who are willing. And I was able at that time to get these through particular compounding pharmacies. So like pharmacy grade peptides. And we began, and especially in some of the more challenging body repair cases or immune cases, they became indispensable, meaning that if I worked with somebody who had rheumatoid arthritis 15 years ago, maybe we could get them into remission, maybe, meaning they're off their biological drugs. But it would take years of working on gut and working on nutrients and cellular mechanisms and immune system, all kinds of things. When we begin to stack immune peptides as part of the treatment protocol, along with still doing everything else that I just discussed, we would see people going into remission within 1 year, right? Including inflammatory bowel diseases, other autoimmune diseases. So I'm like, and they could feel the difference. They could tell the difference. And if we were ordering more comprehensive immune cell tests, like a lymphocyte map, we could measure the differences in the improvement in T cell regulation. So ultimately, these just became like a standard rotating tool in my arsenal of ways of helping people reach their health goals, and they could get jobs done that the other therapeutics we had available to us just couldn't get done. And so they became really what I felt like was indispensable. Then we end up into the COVID years, and thymosin alpha 1 gets blackballed by the FDA, basically, no. And so the pharmacies can no longer produce that one. And then not long thereafter, of course, we got this reclassification of most of the peptides that we commonly used into up for review, not a ban, but a classification of, until we have more safety data. And what it meant is that any given day, they could just say no more. And therefore, pharmacies were no longer going to invest in inventories that the FDA could pull the plug on in a day. Yeah. So essentially, all of these very useful tools were just rendered unavailable to us. And from the standpoint of someone like me working with my patients, especially people with autoimmune disease, I was like, I didn't feel like we could stop there, right? Like, and just say, oh, well, yeah, I know this. I know of this therapeutic that's very safe, that's natural, that very well could help you possibly go into remission and improve your health in many ways. But because at this point, the FDA doesn't feel that it should be allowed, I don't want to say it that way. I don't want to prove it, but the FDA has its concerns. We no longer have access to it. It just didn't feel right. So at that time, I really had no choice but to begin to look for sources that I could trust, that were highly purified, purity tested, research grade. And then, of course, in patient encounters, explaining we're doing research here. We're experimenting. You need to consent the fact that this is what we're doing. But I was able to, of course, continue to maintain that menu of peptides and use them in my practice, which I've continued to do so today, but with lots of qualifications and consent around the fact that we are using research grade peptides. And so that clearly tells you and your audience that the better quality research manufacturers, that I'm not concerned about them having contaminants or impurities. And the other thing is, because I've been doing this now for several years, I'm able to measure it's working, right?
Yeah.
They are effective. They are working. So essentially, we've been left with, if you want to use, and this may change again in another year or so, especially because there are, I'll tell you about this in just a moment, but if somebody is interested in using these tools, they can either, like with growth hormone secretagogues, you can still get some morelin.
Yep.
Right. But that is it's nowhere close to as powerful or as good as CJC-1295, ipamorelin, or tesamorelin. It just isn't. And so you could try it, and if it worked for you, great. But if somebody wants, but generally speaking, if somebody wants to use these tools, then their only option is going to be. And then my answer to that would be, do your research, do your own research, read about the company, read about their testing. Do they test every lot? Who are they? What's their reputation? Don't look for the best pricing, because that's typically going to be stuff that's being shipped over from China, which may or may not be the peptide. It could have contaminants, but you do have to do your own due diligence on identifying sources that you trust, that you would be willing to grab these peptides from, and sign disclaimers that it's for research and not for human use. And you understand that when you purchase them. Now, there's a company that's organizing right now that may go public that is actually well-funded, have big-time investors, that is planning to become a major peptide distributorship. They'll have their own synthesis labs, and they're looking at having the full menu, of peptides, including new ones that are being researched in the most optimal forms of delivery: topical, oral, injectable, nasal, and having a robust supplies. And if this company is successful, they will become like the best place to just go get the things that you want, and know that the purity standards, because when you have companies like this that have that kind of leverage, they can start creating data. We can actually do IRBs. We can do studies, investigational studies, which is what's lacking from the FDA perspective. And if we can create those studies on a large enough population and essentially demonstrating at least safety, right, then there's no reason to say, well, you can't have access to them. But ultimately,
Oh, go ahead. How do they do that? Like, how do they get around doing studies when it's not supposed to be used?
Because every drug right now that's not approved yet by the FDA is being studied under an IRB for potential use in humans.
Okay. So they can do it in I just didn't know the legalities.
The reason most of these peptides, or one reason most of these peptides have not been studied in human trials, is this very expensive. And most of them aren't patentable, meaning whoever does the research and proves that BPC-157 perhaps preserves cartilage, whoever does that research can sell BPC-157, but they can't prohibit anybody else from selling BPC-157 either. So pharmaceutical companies, I'm not making a statement about them one way or the other. They have their business model to make money, but they're not necessarily interested in spending the tens of millions of dollars to run a trial for to prove the effectiveness of something that all their competitors can just easily manufacture and sell as well.
No, it makes sense.
And so that's what's limited. But a company whose all future business model is, we're going to become the global peptide supplier, and that's how we're going to make money, has a strong interest in actually seeing to it that the restrictions on the availability of these things are reduced.
Well, please let me know if they actually move forward. I would love to.
Oh, I will. Yeah, they're getting set up. It's just a question of being able to get the studies done. The current regulatory environment, I think, is a little less obstructive to this type of work. I've already said things on this particular recording that I probably wouldn't have said a couple years ago, right, when the FDA. And I'm not making a statement about politics or anything there. I'm talking about the environment of healthcare. And where we stand right now is that it's a little more friendly to physicians exploring novel therapeutics and utilizing them.
Right. Yeah. Well, even what we've seen over the last, which has been amazing over the last 10 to 15 years with the psychedelic therapy, I never thought I'd see it. And, it's amazing. So.
It is amazing.
Okay, that's awesome. So I guess we could dive into, I know, actually, I think the big thing, like you said, is just be smart, do your research. Because I think there's this thought out there. Obviously, like the way I look at it is if I can get something via compound, like Tirzepatide,
Mm-hmm.
and it's no more expensive than research, why would I go research? I'm going to get the compound. You know what I mean? It just
I agree
same
with
price.
you. From
Yeah.
my perspective, if I can prescribe it through a licensed pharmacy, even if
Yeah.
I have it available as a research peptide, I'm going to go that route. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah. So
Yeah. But I just, the view of all gray is bad or all research is bad, or obviously you don't want to go to madeinchina.com and buy peptides. You know what I mean? And there are people doing it. It's crazy out there. But I think it's kind of like a spectrum. And if you do your research and you make sure it's a quality company, I can't imagine there's all that much to
yeah,
be concerned about. But
no. And
yeah.
the dosing protocols, which again is do your research. For these
Yep.
days, you can pick almost any peptide and do just a standard Google search on dosing. And there are people who would like to sell you that peptide, or other clinics where they've already like written out the research-based dosing protocols.
Yeah.
And so it's very easy to find out what are the dosing parameters, but it's important that you follow those. And most of these peptides, not all, but most of them are going to be the most safe and effective when you're using the appropriate pulse doses of them over time.
Mm-hmm.
And some of those, that's very important with like immune peptides.
Mm-hmm.
There are some that you could dose daily at low doses and be fine, but
Yeah.
you definitely want to make sure that you have reviewed those protocols and follow those protocols if you're going to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. We've gotten, I use a lot and I try to get, not just for peptides, but I mean, I've used ChatGPT for years, but it's taken it to a next level with like going through my blood work and, talking about peptides and do any of these, interfere with others. And am I taking too many, I literally give it like a list of all my supplements and it's like, oh, you're missing this or you're taking too much of this. Not that it's the end all, but it's so fast. You know what I mean? You can feed it all this info and it's been so helpful. So, all right. So, I guess we could talk about, we could start with what I like to call the Morlins, if you want to go down that road. Now, I'm taking some Morlin. I do want to move over at some point after a break to CJC IPA. I have heard Ipamorelin can make you hungry. I'm not sure about that, what your thoughts are. But unless you take it at night, then I guess it wouldn't really matter. But I'd love to, because I know the biggest benefit for me with Samorelin is I sleep better. It really does help my sleep, but other things could help my sleep too. So it's like I definitely want more benefits than that, but I also haven't been on it. This is only my second cycle of it. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, and then Tesamorelin too. So.
Yeah. So when we get into the growth hormone secretagogues, again, peptides that are essentially designed to increase pituitary production of growth hormone. And then that growth hormone is, if it works for you and it's increased as it passes through the liver, there's conversion to IGF-1, which is a biometric that's stable and can be measured so that you can know you're not wasting your money. And if somebody is going to work with the Morlins, I do recommend that if they can, ask your doctor. It's not an expensive blood test for an IGF-1 level. Understand our baseline. There are some people who come into my program in their first labs, they're already 98% on IGF-1. And they're like, hey, my friend told me about Tesamorelin. I'm like, you don't need it. We don't need to go to 300% of what's the normal level with these things. So, first you assess your own level, and then we'll talk about, the different ones. But typically after you've done anywhere from 30 to 60-day pulse, whatever you determine to do, you want to repeat a level. Because what I've seen in clinical practice is, honestly, back with Samorelin, which I used initially years ago, I didn't necessarily, some people got a really great response, but it was really hit or miss. And there are a lot of people who we couldn't really measure any change and they couldn't detect any change. And then CJC 1295, which is a separate one, commonly combined with Ipamorelin. Ipamorelin can be used as a solo agent, but usually it's combined, was, theoretically more powerful. and would work better and not that expensive, similar cost really. And same thing, you would inject it at night. And you could either, there's different approaches to doing this. Some people say do it 5 nights out of 7. So you take 2 nights off over a period of time. You can also do like straight 30-day pulses and then take time off. So there's different ways kind of figuring out how you're responding. But with that one, I could definitely measure differences. And this isn't something based in research. This is just an observation for me in my clinic, and that may not extrapolate to the whole population. Women specifically typically get very good responses to CJC-1295 and ipamorelin. And so and men, I get variable responses with CJC-1295 ipamorelin. Sometimes we see a nice response, sometimes we don't. And then you go up the ladder to tesamorelin, which is commonly combined with ipamorelin. Now, tesamorelin is available through compounding pharmacies because it was actually FDA approved. Yeah, it's very expensive. It was an FDA approved therapeutic specifically for a condition called lipodystrophy in HIV patients. So HIV patients who had AIDS would get this fat accumulation, even though they were actually becoming malnourished and thin. They would get this fat deposition right around their stomach, and tesamorelin was found to be effective at reducing that fat. So when it comes to reducing belly fat, tesamorelin does have an impact, only if you're also exercising and eating with a nutritional program. Like if you don't go in a calorie deficit and just use tesamorelin, you're not going to just magically burn off belly fat.
Yeah. Now, when you say belly fat, is it probably more visceral fat?
Yeah.
Or it's okay.
Yeah. And so, and it does, and it works great, and it's really powerful. And almost universally, men or women, we see major increases in IGF-1 when we use tesamorelin and ipamorelin. So if cost was not an issue, that would be where I would go to first.
Okay. Even as a woman?
Yeah. If cost is not an issue, because it works. And also, usually it's also a little better tolerated. CJC-1295, not always, but it can cause some itching and burning. It also will cause flushing, and people will feel kind of hot after injection for like 30 minutes. Sometimes that can make it a little harder to get to sleep. And so, but again, a lot of my patients are successfully using CJC-1295 and ipamorelin. Most of the male patients that work with me are electing to use tesamorelin combined with ipamorelin. And, and there are others in this category. There's something called a ghrelin mimetic, but those really increase hunger. So those are for people who want anabolic drive, right?
Okay.
Now, what happens when we increase IGF-1? A lot of people think it's a muscle building peptide, and it does facilitate muscle building, but it's not necessarily a directly anabolic agent the way, say, testosterone is. Right. It's not. Growth hormone does a lot of things. It is involved in repair of all tissues, especially overnight while we're sleeping, like rebuilding of tissue, repair, recovery of the body. For some people, it will also deepen sleep. A higher level of IGF-1 will help them improve their deep sleep. So generally, if someone's getting a good response, what they're experiencing is that they sleep more deeply, their energy is better. Also, if they're invested in a fitness protocol, they're actually able to train a little harder, longer, and recover faster and increase their frequency of training. And then combined with perhaps during that time, a modestly low-calorie diet, they're able to actually strip some fat while they're actually maintaining, preserving, or even building muscle. And a lot of people also just note an improvement in general energy. Not everybody, but some people do. So, as you age, your IGF-1 levels are going to naturally drop. And there's a debate about this because some people are concerned that maintaining within the normal range, staying on the higher end, or they say the top quartile of the normal range, is there an increased risk of cancer? Well, that hasn't been proven to be true. And so, there's this sort of, like for some, they would advocate, you don't want higher growth hormone because that's going to increase your risk of cancer. On the other hand, low growth hormone increases your risk of sarcopenia, muscle loss, osteoporosis, bone loss, increased frailty, debility, right? Which is a major, major health risk for all causes of death associated with aging. So based on the totality of the research right now, I would favor for healthy aging you at least want to be over the 50 percentile mark for your age. You'll get a range specific to your age. And that range could be 70 to 220. And let's make the math easy. It wouldn't be this, but maybe it's 100 to 250. Well, what you'd like to see is that you're somewhere between 175 and 250 at baseline as you're aging. And if you're not there, then you're on the lower side. Now, some of the people who come to see me who have been deconditioned and they're not healthy will have measurably low growth hormone levels. And a lot of times that's just they're not eating enough protein, and they're too sedentary, and their sleep is disturbed, because these are the factors that affect IGF-1 naturally. Exercise is a major increaser of IGF-1 production. Sauna increases IGF-1 production or growth hormone production. Deep sleep improves growth hormone production. Eating a higher protein diet improves IGF-1. So these are like the natural approaches to improving your own growth hormone IGF-1 levels. And I do think that aging in the higher portion of the range probably has its advantages. It's an opinion, but I do believe that. And if you're in the lower portion of the range and you successfully use one of these growth hormone secretagogues, and you measure, okay, that just took me from the 25th percentile to the 75th percentile. And then you use an appropriate sort of press pulse dosing cycle. So you did, let's just say, and I'm just throwing this out there, you did 30 days on, 30 days off, 30 days on, 30 days off. Right now, what the research suggests is that instead of down regulating your own IGF-1, which is often the case when you augment hormones as you begin to suppress the actual glandular function, that you increase baseline IGF-1. Now, again, this is based on observation in my clinic, and so it doesn't prove anything. What I've observed is that people who did have, were on the lower side of the range, when we've used these peptides, press pulse over time, that typically their new baseline IGF-1 a year later, when they're not using the peptide, is significantly improved from where it started. Now they're now producing more IGF-1, but if they've been working with me, they've also optimized protein and they've gotten into fitness, and there are other things, and their sleep quality has improved. So there are other factors that could have influenced that. Yeah. But I do like this class of peptides. I think there's a lot of potential benefits. It's another one that will get thrown in for a repair from surgery, right? Because
and I was taking it after my first surgery, at least. So when I start back in December, my range is 65 to 216, and I was at 114.
All right. So what was the range? Say the range again.
65 to 216. So definitely below the 50%.
Yes.
And now I'm at 127 5 months later. So I didn't go up much, but I've only been taking Somorelin, but I've improved other things too. So, maybe next round I'll try. If
I were you, I would up level to my first next move would be just CJC-1295 combined with Ipamorelin.
Okay, not Tesamorelin. Go ahead and try the CJC.
I don't think you need to go there yet, because if you're a really good responder because CJC to IPA typically is 1/3 the cost of Tessa.
Okay. I think you scared me more about the side effects than anything, but not scary.
It's not dangerous, but there's
no, I didn't mean that way.
But there's definitely a potential for like a flush, like a warm sensation that may hang.
Well, niacin does that to me almost every time I take your vitamin, Vic. I get Dr. Vickery.
Because the new formulation.
It's weird, and I don't not every time. It's weird. It's random, but it probably depends on how much food I have in my stomach with being on Tirzepatide.
Yeah, you're unusually sensitive. Ever since I shifted the ratios of nicotinic acid and niacinamide, we have not had flushing reported. But clearly,
has that happened already?
Yeah, the new batches. I mean, the first batch that I had, the first 250 bottles had the 50 milligram split. Now it's a 75, 25. Okay. Acid, which is also split into twice a day. So the actual dose on any given day of any portion is 12.5 milligrams, which theoretically shouldn't cause a flush, but it could for you.
Well, and I think the times it did, I took 2 instead of 1, because sometimes I'll.
Okay, there you go.
So that's probably it.
Yeah. And if you did have more food in your stomach, you'd probably eat it. Yes.
Yeah. Now, even though it's not Somorelin, I know it's related. What are your thoughts on, it's kind of related, on AOD 9604? Because there's a ton of people who are interested in it. They use it for stalls. They use it for visceral fat.
Yeah.
But it sounds like tesamorelin, if you can afford it, is basically gonna do the same thing but more.
Again, yeah, it's a popular one. I have used it in a lot of patients. I haven't used it over really probably the past year just because we never saw a lot of results. Now that doesn't mean that there aren't results and that there aren't, but I never really was able to measure improvements. The patients didn't experience improvements. And if we identified which of the growth hormone secretagogues really did work well for them, when we got those improvements, we just went ahead. So I've kind of, and I might need to revisit it, and there might be data that shows up that says, oh, no, this works great. And it was just kind of a weird population, or maybe at the time the compounding pharmacy wasn't making a good quality. I don't know. But I never really was able to see much of a response to it in the patients I was treating.
But pretty much tesamorelin's doing the same, but more or better. Yeah.
I mean, if you want to augment IGF-1 and you can afford it, tesamorelin is your best, I think, your most powerful option.
Yeah. Okay.
Which also has FDA approval, and you can actually get it from a compounding pharmacy.
Yeah. But it's even more expensive that way. I will tell you that.
Yeah.
That's one. It's like just for the cost alone, I probably would not go that route. I'd go the other route.
And real quickly, just some understandings around timing of dosing. So typically the dosing is going to be prior to bedtime, and that's because you're going to produce most of your growth hormone when you enter into deep sleep. So we're trying to add a catalyst to that. Now, but it's critical though that if you've had alcohol or food, that you don't actually dose it. You're wasting a dose, because
you want 2 hours at least, right?
Of 2 hours. 2 hours that you've had no alcohol, no calories, if you want to make sure you're going to get your best response. Otherwise, you're interfering potentially. You've got other things on board that are going to actually interfere with growth hormone release, and you could be wasting your money. Now, there are some people who will wake up and inject it in the morning prior to exercise fasting, because exercise is another stimulus. And some who like exercise and then get in a sauna, and they'll go ahead and inject in the morning and not necessarily inject at night. And that can be quite effective as well. Like fasted exercise, use a shot of your growth hormone secretagogue at that time for people who perhaps would rather not inject at night.
Yep. I know with AOD, most people do it in the morning fasted.
Yes.
So, but I mean, I know that's different. But and then if you were doing say, now that's with Tessa, say with CJC, or even with Tessa and IPA, the people that do it in the morning, do they tend to do IPA with it in the morning, or do they do it at night?
Usually most of the people, you can buy tesamorelin solo, but it's not that much more expensive just to buy a combo of Tessa IPA. And so most of the time, people are on the combination. Same thing with CJC 1295 and ipamorelin. I mean, it's very, very rare that we have these split up. Almost universally, whichever one our patient is using, it's combined with ipamorelin.
Okay. Awesome. Well, that'll be my next, we'll see. And then I'll get my blood work done again. And so I really want to try to get that number up above that 50% mark, whatever it would be. That's what you're thinking.
Yeah, no, you would. And ideally, if you can get it up to the 70th or
75
percentile, 75th percentile.
And then is it something that you just continuously use, or does your body eventually start kind of producing it on its own and you can back off? Like what?
Yeah, it varies from individual to individual, of course, and that's somewhat dependent on all the other aspects or variables that are influencing someone's overall health picture. Again, in my experience, if we see positive re-entrainment of IGF-1, some of my patients will no longer use cycles, and their baseline level is somewhere in that top half, possibly top quartile. And it'll fluctuate. It's supposed to fluctuate. They may have, but most of the people who utilize it, who are also definitely into fitness, always wanting to improve fitness, they will usually continue to press pulse it. They like the impact. They like how they feel. They like the results they get. We monitor the levels. We make sure we're not like pushing them up to too high of a level of IGF-1 over time. So most people will just end up sticking with it if they get a good response. They may reduce the frequency. Like they may go from, instead of a 30 on, 30 off, they might go to a 30 on, 60 off.
Yeah. All right. I know one of the other really big areas, of course, is the healing and inflammation and all of that. there's a lot of people. I mean, obviously I talk about BPC and TB500 all the time. And, if you're recovering from surgery, your dosing is probably going to be different than if you maybe have a tennis elbow or something like that. I know people that have used it for plantar fasciitis, all kinds of stuff. And then you also have a lot of people using these combinations like Glow. It also adds GH-secretagogues, which helps the skin, but it has BPC and TB500. And then there's another one that has the KPV, which I've been looking into. That one looks pretty awesome too. I don't know if you've, but what do you want to talk about in terms of those?
Yeah, I mean, so KPV sort of falls in its own little category. It is specifically, it's the best option we have right now for people who have what is called mast cell activation. Mast cell activation syndrome is a really challenging immune problem. There's all kinds of different triggers people have. Mast cells release histamine and other inflammatory modulators, and they'll end up having these really terrible reactions. There's a lot of gut work you have to do and a lot of immune system you have to work. And KPV is one of the peptides that often can help bring that under control. It's also really good for gut inflammation, right? So it improves gut integrity, reduces gut level inflammation. KPV can be taken orally. It's only three amino acids long. So you can take it orally and get, positive benefits. As far as like repairing tendons, ligaments, cartilage, recovering from injuries, KPV is not one that I've put into that box yet. So that it might eventually, we might see some benefit there, but and again, anything I'm doing doesn't mean that's the only way to do it. It's just one physician working in their clinic, observing results and kind of working with what they have, and also trying to be conservative to some extent with our patients' resources.
Absolutely.
And so with KPV, where I've primarily targeted that as people with gut level inflammatory issues, gut integrity issues, and mast cell activation. So I'll bring it in, it's safe, and it can work really well. Now, BPC-157, which is my favorite peptide, and maybe everybody's favorite peptide, it's my desert island peptide, meaning, again, earlier we had the supplements.
Yes. Oh, yeah. I want your desert island peptide.
If you're going to put me on a desert island and you say you can only have one peptide for the rest of your life, but you can have an endless supply, that's BPC-157.
Wow.
The number of, at least, so there are an enormous number of mechanistic studies where you're just looking at what does it do in this type of tissue or cell. That doesn't always mean that it's backed up by a full human trial of measuring response over time. And then there are a lot of times animal studies, which I personally sometimes get challenged by using animals as our basis of research and stuff, but that's where a lot of the studies are done. And so from a mechanistic standpoint, there's so many impacts on human systems. Everything from sensitizing growth hormone receptors, meaning possibly improving the response you get to that higher level of IGF-1 in terms of repair recovery, protecting from deterioration, cartilage and connective tissue, and activating repair, synthesis cascades where your body is beginning to actually build back collagen and repair things, to tamping down inflammatory cytokines universally across all tissues, including the brain, potentially increasing BDNF, which is brain-derived neurotrophic factor, basically our growth hormone for our brain. And then you go into the gut, and it's like the most phenomenal gut anti-inflammatory peptide ever. Right. And it's actually original site of secretion in the body is the gastric juices. That's where we make BPC-157. And what the theory is, we don't know if it's true or not, was that probably ancestral diets where we were actually eating like raw tubers and roots and herbs, and also possibly grinding bone and eating, we were probably creating micro tears in our gut as these things would traverse through there. And BPC-157 would have been one of the signaling molecules to help accelerate repair of that tissue. Again, that's a theory, but it does make some sense to me of why it's such an effective gut healer. And so, it's one of those that for just about any particular reason that a person has inflammation, whether it's the gut, it's the body, other health issues, brain fog, anything, I am going to try BPC-157.
Nice.
Concussion recovery, traumatic brain injury recovery, surgery recovery. So there is a difference in dosing between, say, just maintenance and a guy like me who's 55 who wants to keep lifting weights and doing all these things and wants to minimize the deterioration of my body. somebody like me, I'm likely, I'm not saying I am, just
Yeah.
but I'm likely to go ahead and use like an oral dose of BPC every day as a maintenance strategy for both gut and body. But then if I overdo it in the gym and I'm starting to get some rotator cuff tendonitis, I'm going to switch to a high dose injectable version for a period of time, maybe 30 days until I get that settled down. And so I'll kind of rotate back and forth. There are some very rare but possible risks associated with BPC-157, so everybody still has to pay attention to how they're responding. The other thing, and I know you've already experienced this, but one of my daughters, I have twin daughters, and this was a couple of years ago, but she had, during her sophomore year of high school, blew out her ankle, tore the ligaments, tore tendons. It did not heal. 6 months later, she's taken to surgery. They sew up all of her ligaments and do a really nice job of restoring structural integrity. But ultimately, the two main extensor tendons that also had tears were not addressed. The orthopedic surgeon did an amazing job. I'm grateful forever that what he did, because it was really complicated. It just, the tendons they weren't thinking about. And so afterwards, she's healing, but then she's still got this weakness and this pain. Her ankle is stable. And a brilliant foot and ankle specialist out of Atlanta is on his way through to go do a TED Talk. And he stopped by my clinic with his ultrasound. He ultrasounds her ankle. This is now a year out from the end. He's like, yeah, the ligaments look great, but these two tendons have massive tears in them. And it was identical to what was seen on the MRI a year ago. So you're a year out. They have not healed, right? Wow. It means they're not going to heal. Like, the tissue's not good. You're going to need to go back to surgery. But he had already prepared for that, and I had to. So under ultrasound guidance, he did a nerve block, and then I watched as he injected BPC-157 into each of those tendon sheaths, like directly into the tendon.
Wow. Yeah.
And then 6 weeks later, we drive back to his clinic, and he re-ultrasounds her ankle, and the tendons are 100% healed naturally.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So is there something then too, like, I did not inject near my knees. I wasn't willing to, knee infections.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand this is a different situation, but do you think there's something to injecting near your injury site?
No, I mean, people go back and forth with that. So truthfully, when you inject, so in her case, obviously they went right into the tendon sheaths under ultrasound guidance. But otherwise, wherever you inject on the body, if it's subcutaneous, it's entering the capillaries.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's going to go into the capillaries, and then it's going to circulate through the bloodstream. Most peptides are metabolized very quickly. Yeah. I mean, they're going to run through your circulation a few times, and then boom, they're gone. They sent their signal, done. They're not lingering the way hormones do. And so, from the standpoint of like what's likely, it's likely that wherever you put it in, you're getting the same impact. Some people have speculated that if you're closer, maybe it'll go into that material. Yeah, you'll get a slight, like a less of a dilution effect.
Yeah.
And I have had times where somebody had a very mild anterior ankle sprain. Yeah. And I wouldn't inject the tendon, but I would inject right over where that area was. So because if you're looking at it from your ankle, it's kind of a shallow area of skin, right? So you can reach down there and actually kind of feel the tendon attachment. That's where they're painful. And in those cases, I would take that little insulin syringe. I would just run it right down to where I'm maybe just on top of the tendon and inject there. And that definitely seemed to be helpful, but I was able to get very close to that site when I injected it. Yeah.
Interesting. And then I also heard that if your primary focus, for instance, is gut inflammation, you're better doing the pill versus
oral. Absolutely.
Yeah. Oral. Okay. Yeah. I take a pill every day. I don't inject much right now, because my knees are healing well. But is BPC one of those that do you still need to, do some type of cycle, or is it if you're doing a small enough amount?
A lot of, if you go out and you do your research, a lot of people being responsible will say, yes, you should cycle BPC. And I think for young people, especially they should. I think you get to my age and maybe the answer is yes, you should cycle. I'm not.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. It's a very safe peptide. And yes, I take it routinely. And I think it does a lot of good. Now, TB500 is another one. And it used to be thymosin beta 4. So this is an immune peptide. It's like a first cousin to thymosin alpha, but it works differently. So it does actually have immune system modulating impacts, but also has substantial influences on general inflammation and as well as body repair. And so there are a lot of a lot of studies looking at it from the standpoint of like corneal ulcerations, burn wounds. So there's so many different things where they've looked at TB500. It also has a significant impact on chronic central nervous system inflammation. And so for people who've had a chronic CNS inflammatory disorder, which will typically cause fatigue and brain fog, and this could be like chronic Lyme, Epstein-Barr, like chronic mono, these types of things, plus many others, or concussions. TB500 can be really long COVID as well. Again, TB500 often gave substantial relief to people when they would use pulses of it. It definitely needs to be pulse dosed, and it can, because of its immune effects, some people will have kind of reactions to TB.
I broke out in hives and had to go. I'm pretty sure that's what it was, but I experimented, I lowered it, I took a break, all of that, but I think it was just a reaction.
Yeah. So it can cause reactions, and some people will have a lot of side effects, headaches and itchy, and it's just, so in those cases, what we do, and it really has to do with something that could be identified on what's called a lymphocyte map with the T helper cell balance. But in those cases, we can reduce it to the fragment. It's the TB500 17 through 23 fragment.
Right.
There's a much smaller stip of the peptide. And most of the time, somebody who didn't tolerate TB500 will actually tolerate the fragment and still get a good response. But it's always, that's been part of my standard post-surgical protocols for a long time now, is a relatively high dose. It's higher than a maintenance dose. TB500 and BPC-157. And when I first started doing this, just like you experienced with your PT, the first couple of times, they were both shoulder cases. The orthopedic surgeon, about 6 weeks out, called me and said, "Hey, I want to talk to you about so-and-so." I did their shoulder. I said, "Oh yeah, no. And they were like, "Hey, they said you had them on these couple of like peptide things. Like, what was that?" And then I'm sitting there getting nervous, like, what happened? And I'm like, "Yeah, I did. Why?" And they're like, "Because I want to know more about it, because this healing is remarkable." Like,
that's amazing.
Quickly, and I would get these calls from surgeons who had no idea anything about it, but were like, "There's some difference about the way this person is healing." And again, post-concussion, traumatic brain injury, there is a potential for reduction in cardiac inflammation, so possibly cardiac remodeling and healing. I mean, there's an enormous number of potential benefits. What we need are human trials where we can prove.
Yes, we do.
Exactly. And then the other immune peptide, which is really not a body repair peptide, it's more about improving immune system balance, reducing, strengthening the immune system for people who are susceptible to frequent infections, or say frequent herpes outbreaks or something like that. We want to boost their immune system. Then we'll use cyclopenthylamine alpha-1, also really good and for individuals who potentially, again, I'm not, one more time, I'm not telling anybody to use any of these peptides. You talk to your doctor, make your own decisions. I'm not advocating for you to use them, but for autoimmune diseases, we almost automatically reflects to TA1 as one of the treatments we're going to do. But again, there's reasons for the autoimmunity. And there are genetic factors as well, but there's a lot of times a gut interface that's going on. There's dysregulation in particular cell functions. So I'm not just throwing TA1 at them. I'm actually getting those assessments, looking at what's going on in their body and their gut and their immune system. And we're building a comprehensive plan. And then we're layering the TA1 in to see if we can kind of catalyze a faster shift and change. But it's
I have some just in case. You know what I mean? I'm like, well, I know someone in particular that got COVID and immediately started taking it, knocked it out.
And that was where when it started showing up back in 2021.
I lost you.
You lost me? Can you hear me? Hello?
I can't hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah, I can't hear you. Check your microphone, maybe.
No, it looks good. I'm here. Can you hear me?
Here, let me.
So you mentioned like with the COVID thing.
Yeah.
And actually that was when thymosin alpha, which made sense to me if there was a viral pathogen, that based on the previous research we had on thymosin alpha, that would be a possible smart peptide to use to fortify your system. But not that it would mean you wouldn't go and pursue any really solid treatments for that pathogen, right? It wasn't like, don't do anything else, just use this. But, that was also around the time that ivermectin became a hot topic and hydroxychloroquine, and really became a target of health authorities that, people are being, and again, I'm not going to assign any bad motive here or whatsoever, but, the idea was that people are being misinformed, and they're going to use these treatments, and then they're going to end up really sick, and they're believing that they're safe and all these kinds of things. But essentially, some of the people who were putting out lists for things for people to consider in COVID, which was all at that time, we're all just trying stuff, right? Because who knows? We don't have any at that point. We don't have, whether we like it or not yet, we don't have a vaccine yet. We don't have Paxlovid or anything of that sort. And thymosin alpha-1 would show up on that list. And it suddenly, all I know is from that point forward, the compounding pharmacies got to cease and desist on thymosin alpha-1. Yeah.
Wow.
I know.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So thymosin alpha-1 was, again, to me, an indispensable peptide, because a lot of people who come to me have autoimmune issues and chronic immune dysfunction, and it can really help. But, some people, and again, my disclaimers, but, might use this and possibly, and also on their, their children at lower doses every fall, as a way of potentially improving immune function and potentially reducing risk of infections.
Yeah, that's amazing. I have a couple other topics. I definitely we can end with the NAD stuff, but what are your thoughts on, obviously there are things like retatrutide, cagrilintide that are available in research. A lot of people, there was a whole thing going around, well, it's not real. There's no way it can be real. So I did the research. Absolutely it is. It's the API is public. Anyone can get the recipe, so to speak. You still want to get it tested, all that. So it's not like it's fake retatrutide, unless depends on where you're getting it, I guess.
Yeah.
But, I know there's obviously somewhat of a risk because it's still in studies.
That's right.
We don't know. I know they found some things. I mean, be smart, start low. That's always but what is that kind of your thinking too, that, you're obviously running more of a risk because we don't fully have the studies done yet?
Okay, phase 3 studies are underway, but not completed yet.
Yeah.
And so clearly they saw pretty strong efficacy in phase 2, but what part of the point of phase 3 is to actually prove it is safe across a population of people, and to identify in what ways it may not be safe and who it may not be safe for. Looking at it mechanistically, it is interesting to me because obviously when you activate GLP-1, you're down-regulating glucagon. And in this particular case, we've now added a glucagon agonist, which does have, from the perspective of what's going on in your body during that time, potential advantages. It does, but it is also kind of it's the only one of the three, the GLP-1, GLP, GIP, that's actually bringing in an element that is different than how the body is naturally programmed. And anytime we start to vary from the original script of the design of the body, there's a little bit of nervousness for me, because the body is so brilliant, right? And it's so complex, and there's so many compensating mechanisms. And so I'm like, well, there's a reason why when we activate GLP-1, we suppress glucagon. And obviously it has a lot to do with insulin release and moving, and now we're going to activate glucagon. And I can absolutely see where that could be beneficial and further reduce appetite and energy mobilization. But I have a hesitation there. I suspect it's going to be found to be safe. And probably very powerful. But, at this point, if it's not through phase 3 trial, of course, a lot of the peptides we just discussed,
they've never been trialed, right?
It's proceed with caution. The studies, the 1 milligram was sort of the lowest dose studied, and there was some effectiveness, and then it got better at 2 milligrams and even better at 6 milligrams. If I had already, so let's just say I tried semaglutide and just the nausea was unbearable. And then I tried Tirzepatide, and it was somewhat effective for me, but possibly I had some side effects, or I just wasn't getting a great result. And for my health, these were something that I wanted to be able to use. Then, would I consider retatrutide? Yeah, I would. But I would start at that lowest dose and go really slow and be very careful. with my system. And again, I'm not advocating anybody actually do that. I'm just saying that that's what I do. Cagrilotide, is a different mechanism altogether, amylin. And I like this. I think this is going to be great to have additional tools, because I think if we can activate, say, amylin and GLP-1, then we could actually possibly use lower doses. And
it's apparently a phenomenal suppressant.
And work two pathways. Once again, it's in those final phase of trials. You can go online and pull up some of the studies from the original phase 2, and you can identify what doses they were using that they saw effectiveness. And you can, through research manufacturers, get cagrilotide. And
because when it comes out commercially, it's going to be with the semaglutide mix, the
it
mix.
is, which I don't think is actually the best mix for that particular one.
Yeah, I would agree. I'd love to see it with tirzepatide, to be honest.
Yes.
Yep.
I actually think, based on mechanisms, that retatrutide and cagrilotide will be the most powerful compound.
So basically a GLP-4.
That's right.
A quadruple agonist.
Yes.
And I always thought too that Reta might be a really interesting one for maintenance, just because I guess the glucagon can help with fatigue, things like that, and if you're into the body composition phase, it might help. I know a lot of gym guys that are on retatrutide, so no judgment. I mean, I get it. It's helping. Yes. Okay. So before we'll get into the last subject about the NAD stuff, my friend Eric wanted me to ask you what your thoughts were on hydrogen water. You have any? I know it's
Yeah. So, I mean, if any of all these biohacks interventions that we have that has pretty solid data across a wide variety of different studies that there's positive impacts, hydrogen-rich water is one of those.
Yeah.
So free hydrogen ions in the mitochondria, it's really a backdoor mechanism to cleaning up mitochondrial exhaust and improving mitochondrial efficiency. And it does, it can vary. Everybody has different things going on in their body, but it probably, for most people, is quite effective. Where we get stuck is you've got either the tablets or that you dissolve in the water. And so it is debatable. I mean, it turns into a foam, and you have to drink the foam before it evaporates. And hydrogen ions are incredibly volatile, right? So they're just floating out. So how much are you actually getting? But the study suggests you are increasing. It's going into the gut, it's passing into the bloodstream, it's passing into your cells. People can measure an impact. I keep the hydrogen tablets around. I don't use them routinely, but if I have, I come back, like I've got to go speak at this conference in Sweden next week, and I got to fly in, be there 2 days, fly back. And that's hard on me, right? So I'm going to come back, I'm going to be worn out, my circadian's going to be torqued. I will come back and I'll have like a mixture with like 4 of those hydrogen tablets.
Okay.
And I've done this in the past. Within about 45 minutes, I can clearly feel like my body better. Yeah, it can really help. So antioxidants, anti-inflammatory, mitochondrial efficiency. I think it's worth trying for anybody. It's not that expensive an intervention. It's completely safe. And so
are tablets the only way?
Well, you can also get generators. So you can get machines that'll actually produce the hydrogen, and they have these handheld ones like a water bottle that you can kind of turn on, and it'll generate the hydrogen in the water, and then you can just drink it. Those are better. The challenge is that the quality matters a lot, and some of them are also producing heavy metals and things like that. And so finding one, the original company that came out and really pushed the hydrogen, they came out with these devices that were several $1,000s that would generate the hydrogen water, and you could just then walk up, pour a cup, and drink it. But then there turned out to be a big snafu with that company and what they were creating. But you can find reputable units that plug in that will offer it both via like water or through like nasal cannula. You can actually inhale it. And and I think, if I remember correctly, it's been a while since I looked at this literature. I think there may have been a study on using inhaled hydrogen like for stroke recovery and showing improvements and reductions in tissue damage in the brain. I think that, don't hold me to that one, but I feel like that may have been the case. So I'm a fan. It's not a everydayer for me. For some people, they may decide it is an everydayer, but it's definitely a go-to when my body needs more help.
Are you a fan of like mitochondrial peptides like mots-c or anything like that?
Yeah, but they're expensive.
Yes, they are.
They are. And not everybody's going to benefit from them. People who are fatigued and have metabolic health issues and possibly have complex blocks, it's worth trying because they may get a really good result. But somebody like me, who metabolically is pretty healthy, I one time did do a course because I just wanted to. This was years ago. I could tell no difference whatsoever, and it was expensive. Yeah, and so that doesn't mean it didn't do anything positive for me. But typically, if you actually have healthy mitochondria, the oxidation of glucose and fats is going along smoothly, and mitochondrial exhaust is being cleaned up. You're not necessarily going to see a whole lot of benefit there. But interestingly enough, I was on a teaching session with a peptide specialist last night, and he mentioned mots-c as a potential receptor salvaging peptide for people who've used higher doses of GLP-1s for a long time and possibly down regulated receptor availability. That mots-c it could be a peptide that could accelerate recovery of receptor availability.
Interesting. That's it. Oh God, I can't wait till we can actually study these things.
Yeah, if I had a chronic fatigue syndrome and I felt like it was a mitochondrial issue, one peptide I would definitely consider trying would be SS31.
Yep. A lot of people will do that first.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, is there a way to measure your mitochondria health? Like, are there, or is it?
Yeah, there's the metabolomics test that I use look at a lot of different metabolites involved in all aspects of mitochondrial function. There's also a functional test called a MECreen, SCREEN, where you actually send a blood spot and they take your blood. I know the lead scientist who created this technology. He's amazing. He's also the guy who does like all of the Joe Dispenza conferences, does all the metrics. Like
Yeah.
He's a great guy. He's fascinating. He's at University of California, San Diego. I toured his lab while I was out there. And essentially what they do is they take normal mitochondria and muscle culture cells. They take your blood, they drop it on, they observe the behavior of that mitochondria, and they're able to reverse engineer what are your mitochondria likely functioning like. Wow. It's pretty cool. And so it looks at all these different domains of mitochondrial function, including network domains, efficiency, under both resting and under stress. I think it's like a $400 test, something like that, done with a blood spot, but that will actually tell you what your mitochondrial function is like.
That's cool. Mm-hmm. All right. I guess we'll wrap it up with the whole NAD discussion just because a lot of people are on it, taking it. A couple questions I have, and then you can just touch on whatever you want. I do NAD plus, but I'm also looking into starting one through Thorne, unless you sell one that you can, because I know you've got stuff to tell me. I think it's the NMN. It might be the NR, whichever one's the more common. So taking TMG as a supplementation, is that smart? And then what we talked about prior to starting the recording, is there an overlap by taking NAD plus and NMN or NR? Is it good to do both? I know you already talked to me about it, but the audience didn't hear. So
yeah, no, you can definitely do both. All right. So back to this. First and foremost, that question: can you do a subcutaneous injection and use precursors, nicotinamide mononucleotide, nicotinamide riboside at the same time? The answer is yes. Right. And so I'm going to break this down so that people kind of understand. And there's a lot of this that's to some extent speculative, meaning the research is speculative. So, when you inject NAD subcutaneously, now up until recently, the research did not suggest that you would actually get increases in intracellular NAD, which is what you're really trying to do by injecting NAD or getting it through NIV. And that's because NAD is a complex molecule, and it doesn't just directly cross cell membranes. And so it actually would have to be transported across the cell membrane. And as far as we knew, there weren't any transporters to do that job. And so that essentially NAD was the product of intracellular synthesis processes. And that the only way to potentially catalyze an increase in NAD would be to preload those pathways, i.e. niacin, adequate doses of niacin, which is always step one. And a lot of people jump straight over to nicotinamide mononucleotide or nicotinamide riboside because they see an ad. They've never assessed nutrient status, and they're actually niacin depleted, right? And niacin is more important for other things too, not just NAD. So step one is, you optimize niacin availability, make sure that you're getting adequate niacin, typically to some extent through a supplemental source. And then you can, experiment with the two options, or the NR or the NMN, and both are very safe. And both of them have some data to suggest that they are effective. Now, there are, again, metabolomic reports that I use in my clinic that are getting into the biochemical pathways that can predict which of those is actually going to improve NAD and tell you that you should be using NMN and what dose you should be using, or you should be using NR and what dose, and also able to identify, do you even need to boost NAD? Do you have issues with NAD and ADH balance? Now, most people over 40 do and will benefit from boosting it for all the many reasons that NAD helps us. So recently, though, it was identified that injecting subcutaneously under certain conditions may improve intracellular NAD, and that there are these little transport channels that could be upregulated that could move some of that NAD into the cell. But we don't know what those conditions are, and who's getting that benefit. So what, has been reported to me by my patients with NAD who would get it either IV or subcutaneously, some of them felt like a clear improvement in energy.
Yes, I do. Hello.
Yeah. And, and then some actually felt worse. And then
I've heard that. Yep. Tired.
Some felt nothing, which is the category I had fallen into when I ran experiments. Okay. So my understanding of this not long ago was, though, that whatever response you're getting subjectively to injecting NAD, it's not based on an increase in intracellular NAD. Now, that may not be true based on recent research. And so at the time, what was speculated is that there's some other signaling activity. And the idea was that the only times we would see higher concentrations of the actual NAD molecule in the bloodstream would be if cells were damaged and ruptured and they spill their contents out into the bloodstream. And so when that happens, if it happens to enough cells, it creates what's called a cell danger response, which then mobilizes all these other responses because, hey, there's tissue damage, there's danger. And for some individuals, that end result of that could have been upregulating of pathways that helped them feel better. And usually, if we did recommend it for people, it would be a trial for people with severe chronic fatigue syndromes that we have not found answers for. We'd say, why don't we try this and see? And some people getting routine like IV NAD salvaged it. Like it restored them. They got better. And of course, other people didn't get much out of it. But now we understand that there are perhaps certain conditions in some people who do actually improve intracellular NAD when they inject that NAD. So what we're left with is, one, it appears to be safe. Now, I wouldn't inject high doses all the time because, like we talked about, there's this cell danger response signal, and we're not wanting to activate that all the time. But a dosing protocol proposed to me by one of the owners of the peptide research manufacturers, if you're going to do sub-Q, was once a month, do 100 milligrams a day for 7 days. As we talked about earlier, 100 milligrams is higher than you can tolerate.
I would fall over. Yeah, that would.
Yeah, and that a lot of people will experience, clear benefits from that.
Interesting.
And so, for anybody who, as long as you're not overdosing it and over relying, because you get energy, so you think, I'll just do this every day.
I 3 times a week, 20 milligrams. Yeah,
you're going to start creating problems if you do that.
Yeah,
but if you are mindful about these dosing ideas, it's generally safe for people to try. And then you can see what is it that I experience when I do that. And if there's a clear uptick in available energy, it's very well possible you are somebody who's getting an intracellular NAD boost. And it might be these other mechanisms I mentioned earlier. Now, at the same time, and there's also some studies suggesting that NAD might get broken down into components, and then those components absorbed as preloaders for the NAD pathway, synthesis pathway. And then, of course, we can load in either nicotinamide mononucleotide or nicotinamide riboside, making sure we have a basis of adequate niacin and potentially catalyze that as well. But as the metabolomics report point out, for some people, one of those pathways may be robust and helpful and the other one not so much. And so you'd have to, once again, kind of try the different molecules and see how you respond. And quality is critical with NMN, especially. There's a lot of junky powders and stuff out there.
No, I think Thorne has a good one. I think there were Reservatol or something has it in it, and then they have a separate one too.
And then there are companies like Qualia QUALAI, Neurohacker.
Yep.
They make a comprehensive that has niacin, cofactors. Yeah,
Nice.
it puts it all together, and they've got
Is
some
that
data
one on your list?
on my list.
The ones that you sell.
No, we don't sell that out of our
Okay,
office.
no qualia. Okay, got it.
Yes,
Now,
but they have an NAD boosting supplement though.
Okay, and then what about the final question was the whole TMG supplement? What's that have to do with NAD, and do people
trimethylglycine?
Yeah.
So that's something that I'm glad you brought it up, because it's something I'm going to have to go research, because the truth is I'm not actually aware of protocols for TMG. I can speculate biochemically what's going on. Trimethylglycine, TMG, or also often called betaine, is a methyl donor. It's 3 methyl groups attached to a glycine. So it's specifically good for people who have reduced MTHFR function. It offers the alternative pathway to MTHFR for recycling homocysteine into methionine, creating methyl groups. So it's a methylation supporting drug. And for people who have possibly lower level methylation function, it can be a nice booster for them. Yeah. And so, but it's used specifically alongside NAD. I don't know about that.
And apparently it's a thing. So, I mean, it's several people ask me. I know people that are doing it. Yeah. I haven't taken that.
Yeah, the people
I haven't gone down that road either, but I'm interested.
The other clinicians I know who use NAD, they haven't brought it up, but I'm really glad you did, because now I'm gonna go find out.
Awesome.
And maybe there is something really important about that combination that boosted. And if so, I'd like to understand that.
Well, if you find anything, let me know.
Yes.
And this has been great. I will link all your stuff in the comments, like I always do, or down in the description. And I really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it. I enjoy my conversations with you, Kelly.
Yep.
What a great interview, you guys. You can go into the description of this video and find all of Dr. Vickery's links, where to find him, his supplements, all the things. Until next time.